Welcome to Conversations with CISOs, security leaders, and technology executives, where we sit down with the leaders shaping cybersecurity and enterprise technology. Today I'm joined by Yosef Beck to discuss consolidation versus best of breed, how security leaders should decide. Yosef, thank you for taking the time to join me today. Before we get started, could you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your background and your current role?
Of course. Thank you, Sullivan, for having me. I appreciate it. Good to be here. So, like you introduced me, right? My name's Yosef Beck. I've been in Atlanta now for over 30 years. I spent about 5.5 years at Georgia Tech and went into business consulting with IBM as my first real job out of college. Was with them for a little bit and then moved to a local secure or consulting firm called JBean Consulting, specializing in just business consulting. I spent the last 3 years or so of my time at JBean focused on risk management and cybersecurity, and then moved into industry at one of my clients, who at the time was IHG, and I spent a number of years in their security organization. I first ran hotel compliance, then took over corporate compliance. I then moved into a security architecture role and pretty much did that for the remainder of my time, but then I also took on security engineering and finally data security while I was there as well. So got a lot of really good experience. I'm now at a company called CRH, Cement Roadstone Holdings. I've been here a little over 2 years now, and I have two different jobs. So my first job is I'm the liaison between our top level corporate function and our Americas business unit. So I work closely with our CIOs and local security teams, making sure they're aligned to where we're trying to go at the corporate level. And additionally, I'm responsible for incident response, threat hunting, and penetration testing globally.
Excellent. So, as you stated, you've led security across global organizations with thousands of locations and massive technology environments. So, when someone asks whether they should consolidate their security stack or invest in best of breeds tools, where should they start?
It's a great question. So I always like to start with business requirements, right? What are you trying to accomplish and why? Are you trying to reduce costs? Are you trying to optimize operations? Once you understand what the drivers are from the business perspective, I move on to the operating model, right? So what can you realistically operate given your existing people, your current capabilities? If the answer is you have one engineer and they need simplicity that comes with a consolidated security stack, right? And you don't have the ability to staff up, maybe to support those best in breed tools, then your answer is sitting in front of you, right? There's no need to do any fancy calculations. Go with the consolidated security stack. But if you're an organization that's built to scale, right, you're underperforming, then start with a current state assessment of your tools. You're going to want to score them. And once you have a current state assessment complete and you know where you stand from a tooling perspective, from a rationalization, standardization, and centralization perspective, then you can determine what makes the most sense for your organization.
So, people will often talk about tool sprawl as if it's automatically a problem. In your experience, when does having more specialized tools create value and when do they become operational debt?
So I think it goes back to people. If the specialized tool is going to exceed your team's ability to manage, right, whether it's number of integrations, number of alerts, dashboards, or workflows effectively, then the tool is no longer helpful, right? It's become a risk. It's an operational debt that you're just going to have to keep paying unless something from a people, process, or tool changes.
So, can you actually have a large stack if an organization chooses to have best of breed tools, can you have a large stack that is actually well consolidated when it comes to the operational aspect?
It's a good question. So yes, yes and no. You're not going to have maybe best of breed, right? But you will have a something that can work, right? So you always have constraints of people, time, money, right?
Mhm.
And so you're going to have to balance those. You're going to have to focus on um, what is achievable for where you are. And if a consolidated centralized stack is what you've got, there's no reason that it can't meet any of your objectives, right? Depending on, you might have to pull some of those layers or levers to make it work, but you can do so and still achieve the desired business outcomes.
So, how do you go about that? How do you go about consolidating when it comes to the operational side, even though you may have separate tools for things and making sure they all flow, cohesively for your team?
So a couple things. One is going back again to your requirements. So both business and technical requirements, and also looking at what do you need from them, right? So there's a technical fit and complexity perspective, right? How well does a tool work technically? How complex is it to take care of? Functionally, how well does it meet your security control objectives? Does it complement or integrate with other existing tooling? I mean, you're never going to have one consolidated stack from one vendor, right? That might be a utopia for some people, but it's just not possible, right? There's no vendor out there that does everything. There are some that get close, but not everything, and certainly not well. Um, but you will still have to integrate with other things, even outside of security, right? You got a ticketing system that's not going to be provided by a security vendor, right? So you're going to have
Right.
to integrate with
Of
something at
course.
some point. You're going to have to look at the tool health, right? So whether it's a current state tool and tool set, all right, or future state, how well will it help you meet required SLAs? You know, how many failures, incidents, or trouble tickets will that tool generate or has generated in the last year? You know, if you've got it deployed already, how well is your deployment status in terms of coverage? Maybe you've gotten to 80%. What's it going to take to get to that remaining 20% of your estate? And you should look also at vendor support, right? How well are they meeting your needs? If you're consolidating and you're going down to one vendor, they better meet your needs and be responsive. Last but not least, right, I think is how well do you as an organization really understand and leverage that tool? The last thing, the last thing I would want is to have shelfware, right, where I paid for something and we're not getting bang for the buck. So
Mhm.
one way to do that is look at your current state of documentation, not only of what's available from the vendor, right, but do you have a run book for it? Are you enforcing and maintaining naming and tagging conventions? Are you, you know, we mentioned the coverage. How well have you deployed it? So is it working for you? And what's the ability to move that needle to continue to enhance and keep it performing? So as a security stack, all of that stack needs to meet those requirements, at least to some degree or another, depending on what you're trying to accomplish.
So when security leaders are making purchasing decisions and they're evaluating, consolidated stack versus best of breed, beyond just the actual licensing cost of consolidation can maybe save us some money, best of breed may cost some more. What are the other costs that security leaders tend to underestimate when evaluating security products?
Good question. Would you be upset if I said people, process, and technology again?
No, no. Just elaborate a
Um,
little bit for me.
seriously, right? There are so many switching costs you have to consider. I do think the one that we as leaders are probably the most consistently bad at or poor at, right, is estimating the people costs. And it's not just the training costs. There's a change management aspect, right, of getting people to buy into and enthusiastically adopt your new system. There's a ramp up time from a people perspective, right? At what point do you start getting real performance and a return on investment out of that new tool? Figuring out when that's going to occur and be able to predict it at least decently, right? We're not very good at that. There's also a real cognitive load that I think you have to consider when you're looking at any new tool, right? Every new console, every new alert format, every new workflow, those are going to introduce friction for the teams, and you're already stretched thin. Because face it, we're in security, right? We're all stretched
Mhm.
thin. That's by default. We know that. And you're asked to do more with less. So any tool that's going to increase operational complexity is just going to continue to cost more every day you continue to use it. So in this case, less is almost always more because it's actionable and something you can support. So I
Mhm.
really do think people is probably at the heart of it. Um, yeah.
So on the flip side of less is more, are there any scenarios where you think more is more, where you believe best of breed consistently outperforms those consolidated platforms?
So I think yes. I think in emerging security fields, right? So think
Mhm.
of data security or AI security. AI is at the top of everybody's mind, obviously, but data security
Mhm.
really only took off as a discipline, right, with dedicated tooling, I would argue, maybe 4 or 5 years ago. And AI is very much in its infancy. There's a million startups, it feels like, all over the space, right? Nobody's had an opportunity to commoditize or standardize tooling. And so there's always going to be some cutting edge startups, right, that's going to help drive the field towards standardization and consolidation. But I think to answer your question, that's where you're going to see best of breed solutions because they're niche, and they're going to outperform that consolidated platform that's been around for a lot longer and had the chance to integrate and you know really build out their capabilities and standardize them. So anytime there's a new emerging security field, I think you should be looking at those best of breed or at least new solutions.
So when it comes to evaluating those solutions, vendors love feature comparison charts. When you're evaluating those products, what do you believe, in your experience, matters more than just that feature checklist?
I gonna go back to my very first answer again. Apologies for the repetition here, right? Business outcomes are what's going to matter, right?
Hmm.
So the way you achieve those outcomes are by having strong requirements. And requirements are not just technical. They should include things like a definition of team effectiveness, a requirement to be able to get to that metric within a defined period of time, right? So it's great to say, your team will be 100% effective, but if it takes me 100 years to get there, there's not a great ROI. I can't sell that anywhere, right?
Hmm.
And a vendor is gonna or can, I shouldn't say they will, but they can promise the moon, right, when it comes to capabilities on how fast they will help achieve. But how fast is the question really? How fast will they
Hmm.
help you achieve those capabilities? Um, so I would not conduct an RFP to compare vendors or products without strong requirements, and those requirements should be linked directly to business outcomes, or you're always going to end up, in my opinion, with a subpar product or vendor.
So you've gone through that evaluation process and you've selected your vendor and you're deploying this new tool. What metrics tell you the decision was successful versus unsuccessful?
Um, so I think this is a critical question. And being a business consultant for 10 years and now having been in industry almost as long, right? I have personally never seen this, in my opinion, properly measured or answered, right? A typical analysis is going to be a superficial, are the lights green, right? Is data flowing?
Right.
And that'll say, yeah, the platform's deployed, it's working. Um, and if yes, right, people will say that's a successful deployment. But I think that's how most deployments go, right? We get through the actual deployment. You might have your smoke screen testing afterwards. You'll have a support period for a short period of time, but as long as people are accessing it, we'll say it's done. Another more advanced analysis, right, might take it a step further. Ask questions like, is my team faster? Are they more efficient than they were before? Or we'll ask, how have this mitigated security gaps, right, and reduce some risks? And I think those are good questions to ask, but you don't typically have the data to really back them up, right? You're only got gut feeling to say, yeah, I feel like we're moving faster, or, well, we closed 1,000 tickets more than the last system last month, sure, but are we really comparing apples to apples, right? So I think
Hmm.
to do this properly, you need to do what's called a benefits realization analysis, where you set clear expectations of what benefits you're going to achieve before you make any changes, right? You measure and baseline your current tooling before you make the changes. And you're doing this not just from an operational performance perspective, but also from a financial perspective. And you're going to use the same measurements that you use the baseline to run again after implementation, right? So post implementation, you then conduct a periodic review of those benefits realized, and you do it throughout a period of time. It's not just a one and done after implementation. You're doing it like 6 months after, you're doing it a year after, and you're really saying, did I achieve what I set out to achieve? As I said, I don't really see people doing this, right? And I think another key piece of this, and I apologize, it's coming from my science background, right? And one of my majors at Tech was physics. So I go back to the scientific method here. You can't use project resources to do that measurement, right? Because if you do, you're impacting the project. They're the ones working on it, and you're going to mess up your
Hmm.
measurements. So you have to plan ahead as a leader and say, I'm going to do this review. I'm going to do the same metrics before and after, and I'm going to use extra people to do this so that I don't impact the project itself, right? Um,
Hmm.
and so, and like I said, it's not a one-time post-implementation. It becomes part of the business process, really, as usual, and make sure those benefits are continuously achieved. And it's not a review of an IT or a securities performance. It's really a measurement of the readiness of the business to get value from that new deployment. Um, so I have never personally seen this done. I have heard about companies like GE and some others that have done this at least in the past. I don't know if I've never worked for GE. I don't know if they still do this. But I do think that would be the right way if you really wanted to make sure that you were meeting your business objectives.
So, how soon after implementation should you expect to see those metrics improving? Should you expect to see the results from your purchase?
I it's a hard question to answer, right? I think it depends to give you a consulting answer, right? It's going to depend on what's the product,
Hmm.
what's the timeline to implement, what's your change management plan look like, right? How are you ramping up your if this is an ERP implementation, for example, stepping away from security, that can take years to deploy if you've got a huge business, right? Not only are there different modules and different capabilities you're moving into it, but you got different business units, right? So it's a really hard question to answer. I would say for each piece, you're going to have to evaluate and say what makes sense. When do I expect? And that's part of comes back to what your business, objectives. At what point do you want to be achieving that? If you've set a goal that, 6 months afterwards, we're going to be at 100% effectiveness, then you should be probably measuring it a month and then 3 months and probably at 6 months and make sure you're going to hit it. And you might even have to be measuring it monthly.
So, for the organizations that cannot afford dozens of specialized security tools, but they also don't want to sacrifice capability, well, where should they start? What is your advice for security leaders that are trying to find that right balance? Is there a framework? Is there criteria that you might use?
So I think there's kind of a couple questions, right? So first is from a trying to find the right balance. I think you need to understand your business, right? So understand, how do you make money? What do you need to protect? What do you need to protect within that business so that it can keep making money efficiently? And then use the knowledge of the risks to prioritize how you staff your people and where you invest in those specialized tools. And again, it's tied back to your business risks, right? Or you're not going to be able to provide as much value as you would have otherwise. If there's a framework for how you'd sit down and make those decisions, um, kind of summarizing, I think, actually one of my first answers, right, which is start with the business requirements. It should include the benefits you want to achieve. Make sure your operating model can achieve the requirements if you gave them the right tools. Figure out your current state, right? What do your existing tools provide you? You're going to review those tools from a rationalization, standardization, and centralization perspective. Make sure those are aligned to your business requirements. Make sure every tool has a defined reason for whether you're keeping it or you're getting rid of it, right? And that
Mhm.
will give you that clear roadmap of which tools are you going to keep and where do you have gaps.
So, where should companies refuse to compromise? Where's that, the capabilities that are worth paying that premium for?
Um, so I think this, again, it's a personalized answer, but ultimately it comes down to where are you as an organization, whether it's a security organization or a broader IT organization or a business as a whole, where are you overwhelmed, right? Where can you not keep up with either your existing tools or with where the business is demanding you make do with less, right? So
Mhm.
you're going to be able, if you've got those gaps where you can no longer provide what needs to be provided from a business perspective, that's where you need to focus on to figure out where do I have to either consolidate tooling or where I might need a specialized tool. And again, it's applying that same framework to say, what do I need, right? But it's based off of what am I trying to accomplish from a business objective perspective.
All right. So, as we wrap up, final question. When it comes to whether organizations should, of course, make that consolidation decision or go best of breed, are there areas or kind of security domains where you think consolidation is good for this, but you need to pick a best of breed for this in a general area, whether it be application security, vulnerability management, kind of you're talking about AI security, third party risk management, things of that nature?
Um, so just to clarify the question, you're asking, where essentially where do I think consolidation is more attractive and or where specialized tools would be better?
Yes, all yeah. Where
Okay.
is consolidation tend to be more efficient? What areas of security is it a better option? What areas of security do you believe it's not a better option? You kind of touched on those with the AI security piece.
Yeah, I think maybe two answers to this because I do think AI is an interesting one, which we all are grappling with, right? So if we're looking at it from an AI perspective as to where it will be most effective, I think that you can't. I don't think at this point you'll be able to get it into a consolidated tool stack
Mm-hmm.
until you have your data in one solution, right? And by that I mean it doesn't necessarily mean it all has to live in one data lake, right? But you have to have the right access for the AI to be able to process and act on it. And so I think AI is going to have to evolve. We all know this. It is evolving. Like I said, it's basically brand new, and we don't know where it's going to go at this point. Um, I think a lot of people suspect it's going to fall off a cliff at some point, but I don't know. I think if you're not just looking at specifically from an AI perspective, right, but from a just general tooling perspective, um, I thinking back to some of my other questions or answers, right? I think it really the specialized tools are going to be much more helpful, like I said, where you have emerging security needs, and
Mhm.
AI obviously is one of them. And I think that having point solutions to meet gaps is definitely necessary, but the consolidation is going to make it easier to get the operational efficiencies out of it to allow your team to be able to focus on those point solutions. So it's a balancing act. The more point solutions you have, the more people you're going to need, the higher your costs. You might get better outcomes, but you got to balance it with all your other constraints.
Great. All right. Well, thank you very much. Thank you, everybody, for watching. If you enjoyed this conversation, be sure to like, subscribe, and leave a comment with your thoughts and suggestions for future guests and topics. And thank you again to Yosef Beck for joining us.
Happy to do it. Thank you so much.